Okay, monitor the weather. I think we all do a pretty good job of this. We just sort of do it intuitively. We all you all mentioned to me you knew it was going to be 81 degrees today. Okay, so we monitor the weather. You don't have to go to NOAA's website. That's not required by the standard. Okay, and I mentioned all those other ways earlier here of how we can monitor the weather. Right, we've got TV, radio, got our smartphone. Okay, there's all these apps now for the phones, right, out there. I know I use one called WeatherBug, but there's all different apps out there for your phones to be able to check the weather. I believe that Federal OSHA actually has come out with an app for heat illness protection as well. So, and it's available to you. I think it's both for Android and iPhone. Okay. But supervisors, you need to instruct your supervisors that they do need to check the weather and keep track of that. And, you know, especially if we're going to have some sort of predicted, you know, high heat wave. Okay, we want to know that's coming because we want to be prepared to deal with that and invoke your high heat procedures. Determine and instruct supervisors on how weather information will be used to modify work schedules, increase the number of water and rest breaks, or cease early if necessary. A lot of employers are doing these things. These are sort of options of dealing with the heat, right? A lot of folks, you know, start a lot earlier in the morning, knock off earlier. And I mentioned earlier about using the audible device. You know, the warmer it gets, the more they blow the whistle for the little rest break, mini rest break, and drinking the water. Okay, so just some good ideas. All right, acclimatization. This is a really, really important factor. What is acclimatization a fancy word for? Adapting to the environment, getting used to the heat. Yeah, it's a fancy word for what I'm going to say is your body from a physiological standpoint adjusting to the heat, right? So everybody from the valley here, San Joaquin Valley? It's here. Okay. Right, we're pretty used to this, right? All of a sudden, end of April, May, we might get some 90-degree days. And when that happens, we all go, oh man, it's hot. It's really hot. You know, you're out there and dealing with it. Man, it was hot today. You know, I feel more fatigued when I get home. And then all of a sudden, it's July, and you get a 90-degree day in July in Kern County, and you're going, wow, it's really nice today, right? Right. So that's that difference. You've probably been out there. We usually talk about 14 days, at least 4 hours a day, working out in the heat to get used to it. Okay. But in July, when it gets up to 115 degrees, 116, like it did, you know, back in when we had that heat wave in 2006, that was the last really bad heat wave I remember. We even had a push of humidity come up from Mexico during that heat wave, and you know, it was like 2 weeks of 110 to 115, you know, that type. Even once you've gotten used to that 90, 95 degree heat, you are not used to that. You are not acclimated to that type of heat. Okay. So there's the early heat to be worried about, the first heat of the year, right? 2008, the young girl in Lodi died, and there was a young man down here in the oil fields died right at the end of May, right? It was 103 degrees at the end of May on that day when that young girl that was working the vineyards up there in Lodi died, and there was a young man down here that I think it was his first day on the job that was working in the oil fields, passed away on that same day from the heat. And first heat of the year, okay? First heat of the year. But then also, when we had that bad heat wave in July of 2006, 84% of all the cases, right, that were turned over to Cal OSHA to investigate occurred during that heat wave, that 2-week heat wave, okay? So we know these things are critical. The other critical factor is new employees. Okay, dealing with new employees. In 2005, there were 25 cases investigated. 12 of those 25 cases were fatalities. And out of those 25 cases that Cal OSHA investigated, 40%, it was the person's first day on the job. 80% of those cases, people have been on the job 4 days or less. Okay, so I've come up with my 3-strike rule for new employees. Okay. 3 strikes. The first strike is that they may not be used to the heat that they're going to be working in. So in other words, you have a worker that maybe works agriculture over in the Salinas Valley, Watsonville area. Then they come over here and they're going to work in the San Joaquin Valley. They come over midsummer to work over here. Okay? And then maybe the job, the second strike is maybe the job that they're doing, right? This work factor here, they're going to be generating a lot more heat because it's a lot harder job. Okay? So that's strike 2. The environment's different, the work's different. What's the third strike for a new employee? What's a new employee want to do for you? Right? They want to bust their butt, right? Right? They don't want to go over to the water cooler, you know, intermittently and get that water or take that 5-minute rest break that they're supposed to be able to do. They don't want to do that because that shows weakness, right? They want that job. They want to impress you. Okay? So those are my 3 strikes for a new employee, but they're at great risk and we realize that. So this whole idea of acclimatization is very, very important, okay? For all 3 of these reasons. Early heat in the year, you know, sort of the first heat of the year, right? Really bad heat wave in the summer later in the year that we're not used to, and then any time with new employees, okay? All right. So, you know, you need to determine how your company is going to deal with, you know, these newly hired workers and lessen the intensity or shift length for a newly hired worker. And we'll talk more about that under the high heat procedures here. Modify the work schedule, reschedule non-essential duties during the hot summer months. Be extra vigilant with your employees. Recognize immediately symptoms of possible heat illness. How many of you take a new employee and actually buddy them up with an experienced employee when they first start? Okay? We do that. I think that's a good idea. Okay? Right? And new employees always get trained, right? We'll talk about training here in a minute. Right? They always get trained before they're put out there, but it's always nice to buddy them up, have somebody looking over them. But you got to be extra vigilant with these new employees. All right, so now we're going to talk about high heat procedures, and acclimatization comes back in here again. Okay, so these high heat procedures only apply to these certain industries. Okay? If you're not in one of these industries, this part of this regulation does not apply to you. Although there's some, I think these things dealing with high heat procedures, I think they make a lot of sense. But if you're in agriculture, construction, landscaping, oil and gas extraction, or if you're in transportation, delivery of agricultural, construction materials, or other heavy materials, these high heat procedures from a regulatory standpoint apply to you. Okay? Okay, so when the temperature is at 95 or above, right, it kicks 4 things in here, right? So you must implement additional preventive measures. And what you're going to see here as we go through these 4 things, the first 3 things, really you're already required to do. It's just sort of saying you need to be extra vigilant because now it's hotter, okay? Because first one here, ensure effective communication by voice, observation, or electronic means. We're already required to do that because we have to be prepared to deal with an emergency, right? We may have to call emergency medical services, contact somebody. So we already need to do that, right? But we need to really make sure that works, you know? Right? There are some places where we may not have cell service. Need to make sure that we have effective communication. Okay, from an emergency standpoint, if you dial 911 on your cell phone, who do you get? CHP, right? Okay. If you dial 911 from a landline phone, who do you get? County. Okay. And there may be a difference for you, okay, depending on where you're at, what you're doing. One or the other may be faster. There are ag employers that I've worked with. Basically, their policy is to call 911 from a cell phone, or they call from a cell phone to a dispatcher, somebody who's got a landline phone, and the person calls the county because they know they're going to get quicker service from the county calling 911. Okay, so they have figured that out. They've asked those questions. They've thought about it. They've planned. So you have to look at what your situation is and plan accordingly. Number 2, observe employees for alertness and signs and symptoms of heat illness. We're just saying the hotter it gets, the more diligent you have to be to keep your eye on employees. Okay? We did a conference call yesterday, a stakeholder call for heat, first one we've done this year. We had 85 participants on the conference call, And a question came up about employees working alone. And usually that question comes up each year. And that's a tough one, but you have to make sure that you have means of communication with employees working alone. There are some extremely difficult situations out there. I can think of workers that I know that go up in the foothills that lock gates behind themselves as they go up dirt roads, okay, to provide maintenance. And so you need to think about, how would I get to that worker? You know, what would we do in the event of an emergency, right? So you need to think these things through for people working alone. You just have to, if it gets warmer, you stay in touch with them more often. Okay, and I've mentioned this, you know, give more frequent reminders to drink plenty of water. Okay, I think some of us are better at this than others. I just noticed this in our office up in Fresno. Just look around. Some people have a water bottle with them all the time. And some of the people that work in the office, I never see with a water bottle, or I never see drink water. So you kind of have to take a look at your employees and remind the ones that aren't the ones that have the water with them all the time and are kind of constantly taking a sip. You have to remind some people to drink the water. And then the fourth one, which is really new and different, it says we need to closely supervise new employees for the first 14 days. Okay, and why do we come up with this 14-day number? What did I say the acclimatization period was? It was about a 2-week period of about 4 hours a day, right, is what we talk about in sort of general terms. And so that's why this says the 14 days. This is like a break-in period for that new employee. Keep your eye on them. Okay? So these 4 things that we just went through apply, right, to agriculture, construction, landscaping, oil and gas extraction, and then those delivery folks that are handling those heavier items. So, but I think even for those of you that don't fit in those industries, I still think this is a really, really good idea based on Cal OSHA's experience. Yes? Absolutely. Yeah, everybody should be treated the same. Okay? Right? So, I mean, I've been asked that question. You know, people driving a tractor, for instance, for ag, same kind of idea. If they've got room there, they can keep a small container there with them and drink it. Otherwise, it should be as close as practical if they can't keep a small container with them there. Okay? Yeah.